My name is Grace. I'm 32 years old. And the night I saw my $100,000 greenhouse being destroyed on my security feed, I learned that some people don't hate your success because it changes you. They hate it because it proves they can't control you anymore. I didn't need anyone to explain what I was looking at. I heard glass crack, metal shelves slam, and the sharp, wet sound of expensive vines being ripped from their supports. I saw shattered ceramic, torn irrigation lines, and crushed orchids scattered across the floor of the greenhouse I had spent 3 years building beside my restaurant. It wasn't just a structure full of plants, it was the centerpiece of my business. The part customers remembered, the thing that turned a good meal into an experience people talked about for weeks. And the person destroying it wasn't a stranger, a thief, or some random vandal looking for quick damage. It was someone who knew exactly what every broken bench, every ruined root system, every snapped stem would mean to me. Someone who wanted me to stand in the middle of that wreckage and understand that refusing her had a price. My phone kept lighting up with missed calls while I stared at the footage, and even before I answered any of them, I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't one bad decision made in anger. It was a message, and it had been building for weeks. Before I tell you what happened when I confronted her, and why my parents still expected me to forgive it, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm genuinely curious to see how far this story will travel. A few weeks before that night, my life had finally started to feel stable in a way it never had before. My restaurant was doing well, private events were booking months out, and the greenhouse was becoming exactly what I had imagined when I first sketched it on paper late at night after closing. I used it to grow herbs, edible flowers, rare citrus, and specialty plants that gave the menu a signature no one else around me could copy. It was expensive, delicate, and demanding, but it was mine. Then my sister asked me for a job. She didn't ask because she loved the business or believed in what I was building. She asked because she had already burned through another opportunity, blamed everyone around her for it, and decided family should open a door that competence no longer could. I didn't refuse her out of cruelty. I refused her because I knew exactly what working with her would mean. I had seen her turn every small criticism into an insult, every responsibility into resentment, and every chance she was given into proof that she deserved more than she was willing to earn. I told her as gently as I could that I couldn't hire someone I didn't trust inside a business that depended on consistency, discipline, and calm under pressure. She didn't hear honesty in that answer. She heard rejection, humiliation, judgment. That same night, the texts started. First sarcastic, then bitter, then openly hostile. She accused me of thinking I was better than everyone, of forgetting where I came from, of choosing money over family. I ignored most of it because I knew the trap. If I defended myself, she would turn my words against me. If I apologized, she would read it as weakness. If I stayed silent, she would escalate until someone else stepped in and told me I was overreacting. That's exactly what happened. My mother called first and said my sister was already in a bad place, and that I didn't need to kick her while she was down. My father followed with his usual calm, controlled tone and asked if I really wanted to damage a lifelong relationship over one job. Neither of them asked why I had drawn the line. Neither of them asked what had happened in the past to make me feel like hiring my own sister would be dangerous. A few days later, she showed up outside the restaurant before opening. She smiled like she wanted the world to think she was the calm one, and I was the problem. She said she just wanted to clear the air, but what she really wanted was to corner me in person and make me soften. When I told her the decision hadn't changed, her whole expression shifted. She looked past me toward the greenhouse, then back at me, and said quietly, "You're going to regret making me feel small." That night, after closing, She sent one more message. Let's see how proud you are when someone teaches you what loss feels like. I screenshotted it, backed it up, and installed more cameras the next morning. That was the moment I stopped calling it family tension and started seeing it for what it really was: a threat. The days after that felt wrong in a way I couldn't fully explain to anyone who hadn't lived through something similar. She went quiet, and that silence was more unsettling than the texts had been. I kept working, training staff, managing inventory, testing new dishes, and pretending I wasn't checking my security app every hour. My friend Alicia noticed almost immediately. She asked me if I thought my sister was done, and I told her no, because people like my sister don't let go when they feel denied. They wait. They watch. They look for the moment when you start hoping the worst is over. 10 days after her last threat, just after 11:30 at night, my phone lit up with a motion alert near the side entrance. I opened the live feed expecting to see an animal or maybe a delivery mistake, but instead I saw a figure standing just outside the frame, close enough to trigger the camera without giving me a full view. Then she stepped forward, looked directly toward the lens, and smiled. Even through the grainy footage, I knew it was her. The smile gave it away. It wasn't nervous or unstable. It was satisfied. By the time I got to the restaurant, she was gone. Nothing was broken yet, but a potted fern had been knocked over near the service corridor, and there was a new text waiting for me. You should really protect those precious plants better. The next morning, my mother somehow already knew my sister had been near the property, but instead of sounding alarmed, she sounded tired. She said my sister was fragile and that people sometimes do things when they feel rejected. That sentence changed something in me because it turned intimidation into an emotional inconvenience instead of what it actually was. My father called later and told me to be careful not to start something I couldn't take back. What he meant was, protect yourself quietly, but don't create consequences that force the family to acknowledge what she's really like. That same night, I stayed late under the excuse of reorganizing invoices and seed trays. I turned off the main lights, left only the greenhouse lamps glowing, and watched the camera feeds from the office. A little after midnight, the side gate shifted. A dark figure slipped through, moved down the herb corridor, and reappeared inside the greenhouse on camera 4. Inside. She had gotten inside using an old access code that should have been deactivated months earlier. I grabbed my phone, recorded the monitor as backup, and moved down the corridor barefoot so I could get close without being heard. Through the half-open utility door, I watched her walk slowly between the benches, like she was inspecting something she already owned. Then she stopped in front of my rare orchids, reached into her pocket, and pulled out pruning shears. Not something grabbed in panic. Something she had brought with intention. She clipped one bloom clean off and let it fall. Then another. Then another. And in a voice so calm it made my stomach turn, she whispered, "Teach you a lesson." That was when I realized she hadn't come to scare me. She had come to leave a wound. I stayed hidden for a few more seconds because instinct told me that if I stepped out too soon, she would minimize it, deny it, or turn it into one more emotional scene no one would ever fully believe. But those seconds were enough for her to escalate from cruelty to destruction. She cut through more orchids, yanked a climbing vine free from its support wire, and backhanded an imported ceramic planter off the bench just to hear it shatter. Then she crossed to the irrigation panel, ripped at the tubing, and sent water spraying across the greenhouse floor. In less than a minute, she had turned 3 years of precision, planning, and investment into chaos. That was when I stepped out and said, "Stop." I didn't scream. My voice came out flat and controlled, and somehow that made the whole moment feel colder. She spun around, startled for half a second, then relaxed when she saw me. "Grace?" she said, like she had wandered in by accident. I lifted my phone and said, "You're on camera." Her eyes dropped to the screen in my hand, then back to my face, and something ugly settled into her expression. "Good," she said. "Then you can watch it back as many times as you want." She shoved a tray of citrus starters off the bench, and pots exploded across the wet tile. I moved forward instinctively, then stopped when I saw the shears still in her hand. She noticed the hesitation and smiled. "There it is," she said. "You finally look scared." I told her to put the shears down. She laughed and asked what I thought I was going to do now. I asked her what she thought any of this would accomplish. Her answer came fast, like she had rehearsed it. She said I humiliated her, made her feel disposable, built a perfect life, and made sure she knew she didn't belong in it. I told her no. I told her the truth, that I refuse to put my business in the hands of someone who destroys everything she touches. That hit hard. I saw it in her face immediately. Her jaw tightened, her shoulders lifted, and the fake composure vanished. She snapped that I thought hard work made me superior, and that I had always loved acting like the good one while everyone else struggled in my shadow. I wanted to list every chance she had been given, every favor she had turned into resentment, every holiday she had ruined, and every rescue she had called love, but I didn't. I just told her to leave. Instead, she stepped closer. The greenhouse felt smaller than it had ever felt in my life. Humid air, broken glass, water hissing from the damaged line, and my sister standing in the middle of the wreckage like she was finally expressing something she had been carrying for years. Then, without warning, she slammed the shears into the wooden edge of the work table beside me. The sound cracked through the room. It wasn't an attack, but it was close enough to say she could make it one if she wanted. My heart pounded, but the fear did something useful. It made everything clear. This was no longer about a job. It wasn't even about the greenhouse. It was about power. She had spent years using chaos to control the emotional gravity of our family, and now I had proof of what that looked like when nobody stopped her in time. My phone started buzzing in my pocket while she stood there breathing hard, and before I even checked the screen, I knew who it was. My mother, then my father, then my mother again. She heard it too and actually laughed. "See?" she said. "They know you're dramatic." I answered on speaker without taking my eyes off her. My mother's voice came through already tense. "Grace, where are you? Your sister is upset." I looked at the woman standing ankle-deep in soaked soil and broken ceramic and said, "She's in my greenhouse." There was a pause, then my father's voice in the background asking what I meant. I said it clearly. "I mean, she broke in. I have video. She's destroying the property right now." My mother's first response was not to ask if I was safe. It was, "Don't say it like that." That hit me harder than I expected, because even then, with the evidence happening in real time, her instinct was still to manage the language instead of the danger. I told them to come if they wanted to see it for themselves. My father arrived first, took one look around and visibly flinched when he saw the scale of the damage. For a second I thought maybe this was the moment he would finally understand. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out his checkbook, and said, "Tell me what the number is." My mother arrived seconds later, already crying, already pleading, already talking about family, pain, and how things had gotten out of hand. My sister stood there and waited for them to save her, because that was the system she had trusted her entire life. My father said we didn't need to ruin her future over this, and that he would cover the repairs if I just ended it tonight. I asked him if he had watched the footage. He said he didn't need to because the situation was already obvious. I said exactly. It was obvious. She had entered after threatening me, damaged property with tools she brought herself, and stood there smiling while she did it. My mother kept repeating that my sister wasn't in her right mind. My father said property could be repaired. I said trust could not. That only made them angrier. Then my sister started crying too, but it wasn't remorse. It was rage wrapped in tears because her usual escape route was being blocked. She shouted that I had always needed her to be the mess so I could be the success story. I told her that wasn't true. What was true was much simpler. She had chosen to destroy something she knew I loved because she wanted me to feel what she felt. The second those words left her mouth, I just wanted you to feel what I felt. The room seemed to freeze. There it was. The confession. Not confusion, not accident, not emotional overflow, intent, purpose, punishment. I told my father to put the checkbook away. He told me to be reasonable. I said reasonable ended when she walked in here with shears. My mother begged me not to call the police because if I did, there would be no taking it back. I looked at all three of them, the sister who did it, the father trying to buy silence, and the mother desperate to rename everything except the truth. And I realized I wasn't just deciding how to respond to my sister. I was deciding whether I was done protecting the whole system that made her believe she could do this and still be forgiven before sunrise. I called the police. I did it standing exactly where I had been standing the whole time, in soaked shoes, with dirt on my jeans and my mother crying 3 feet away. I gave the dispatcher my name, my business address, and a concise description of what had happened. Unauthorized entry, intentional destruction of commercial property, active threat, suspect on scene. My sister started saying, "Grace, don't do this," over and over again, switching tactics so fast it would have been dizzying if I hadn't seen it my whole life. 1 minute she was the victim of my coldness, the next she was terrified, apologetic, suddenly small. My father told me to hang up. I didn't. My mother said, "You're making this permanent." I said, "She made it permanent when she destroyed it." The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. I thanked her and ended the call. The silence after that was heavier than any shouting had been. Once the call was made, everyone began bargaining with reality. My father lowered his voice and tried strategy. "When the officers get here, say you were upset and exaggerated. Say it was a family dispute. Say she came to talk and things got emotional." I looked at him in genuine disbelief. "You want me to lie?" He replied, "I want you to protect your sister." I said, "You mean protect her from the consequences of what she chose?" He said, "Same difference." That answer told me everything. My mother shifted to shame. She said no decent sister would ever put another sister through arrest records, court dates, and public humiliation. I asked her if a decent sister would destroy a greenhouse after threatening to teach me a lesson. She covered her face and sobbed harder. It sounds harsh, but by that point her tears had stopped meaning what they were supposed to mean. They weren't for me. They weren't even really for my sister. They were for the collapse of the family fiction that everything could always be softened, paid off, or reinterpreted before it reached the outside world. My sister kept trying to approach me, and every time she did, I told her to stay back. At one point she said, almost whispering, "I said I was sorry." I answered, "No, you said you were hurt." She froze because she knew I was right. There's a difference. People who are sorry talk about what they did. People who are cornered talk about how they feel. Then she tried a different confession, one clearly designed to recover sympathy before the officers arrived. She said, "I've been drowning for years. Every time people talked about you, it was about your work, your discipline, your vision. Do you know what people say about me? That I'm difficult? That I'm unstable? That I ruin things? I just wanted one moment where you weren't the one everyone admired." I believed that part. I believed she had been eaten alive by comparison. I believed she had let resentment become identity, but belief and excuse are not the same thing. I told her, "Being in pain does not entitle you to become dangerous." She looked at me like I had slapped her. Maybe because no one in our family had ever said something so plain to her face. When the officers arrived, my father made one last attempt to intercept the truth. He met them near the entrance and started explaining before they even reached me, saying it was a misunderstanding between sisters and that emotions had run high. One of the officers, calm, older, clearly used to domestic minimization, asked who made the call. I stepped forward and said I did. Then I asked if we could review the footage immediately. My sister turned white. My mother started saying her name in that warning tone parents use when they want a child to hold on to a lie just a little longer. It didn't matter. The footage existed. Exterior entry, interior movement, the shears, the orchids, the irrigation panel, the property damage, the threatening posture, my audio from the office monitor, the texts, the earlier messages, the line about teaching me a lesson. The officer watched in silence, then asked my sister if she had permission to be on the property. She said she used to. He asked if I had authorized her to enter that night. I said no. He asked if the damaged property belonged to me and the business. I said yes. My father interrupted again to ask whether charges were really necessary. The officer didn't even look at him when he said, "Sir, that's not your decision." Everything changed after that sentence. Not externally right away. There was still paperwork, statements, photographs, inventory documentation, but in the emotional architecture of the room. My father stopped acting like the solution was available. My mother stopped trying to edit the story in real time. My sister stopped performing defiance and started trembling, because for the first time in her adult life, she was standing inside a consequence no one else could absorb for her. She asked me, very quietly, "Are you really doing this?" And I said the truest thing I said all night. "No, I'm not doing this. I'm refusing to stop it from being seen." She looked away then. Not because she finally felt guilt, I think, but because denial had run out of space. One of the officers asked whether I wanted an emergency protective order recommendation included due to the threats and the escalation. My mother gasped like that was the cruelest part of the evening. But by then I was thinking clearly in a way I hadn't been allowed to think in years. Of course I wanted distance documented. Of course I wanted the threats included. Of course I wanted every piece of this preserved in a way no one could rewrite later over brunch or holidays or tearful family meetings. I signed what I needed to sign. I handed over copies of the screenshots. I gave the officer the estimated preliminary loss range with the understanding that the full damage report would come later. My father stared at me like I had crossed some sacred line. The truth was simpler. I had stopped kneeling at it. As the officers prepared to take my sister out, she turned once more and said, "You always wanted to win." I almost corrected her. I almost said this was never about winning. It was about finally refusing to lose in silence. But I was tired, and the greenhouse smelled like wet soil and severed stems and electrical heat, and I no longer felt obligated to give her language she could twist into something else. So I said nothing. She was escorted out. My mother followed, crying. My father lingered just long enough to say, "You have no idea what you've done." I looked around at the wreckage and answered, "I know exactly what she did." Then he left too, and for the first time that night, the room was quiet enough for me to hear water still dripping from the torn line into the soil below. After the police took her away, the greenhouse went quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. A few minutes earlier, it had been full of shouting, excuses, accusations, and the sound of my family trying to bury the truth before it could harden into consequence. Now all I could hear was water dripping from the torn irrigation line and the weak hum of a damaged climate unit struggling to stay alive. I stood there alone, surrounded by broken pottery, snapped stems, soaked soil, and the remains of plants I had spent years growing. Then I called my friend Alicia. When she arrived and stepped inside, she stopped in the middle of the aisle, stared at the shattered orchid bench and flooded tile, then looked at me and asked the only sane question anyone had asked all night: what can still be saved? That nearly broke me, because while everyone else had spent hours trying to save my sister from consequences, Alicia was the first person focused on saving what had been done to me. So we started working. We shut off the water line, disconnected compromised lights, moved trays away from the flooded section, and separated the destroyed plants from the ones that still had a chance. Some losses were obvious immediately. The orchids were gone. The citrus starters had been crushed. Imported ceramic planters were shattered beyond repair. But the hidden damage was worse. Root systems had been exposed. Sensitive species had been thrown out of balance. Seedlings that looked fine at first would collapse later because the environment had been disrupted too violently. Around 3 in the morning, my phone started ringing again. My mother, my father, over and over, as if enough calls could reverse what had already happened. I finally answered, and my father shouted, "How could you do that to your own sister?" I looked down at the broken glass near my feet and said, "Interesting question. You should ask her that while she's sitting in a police station." My mother got on the line next, crying that my sister had made a mistake, and I didn't have to ruin her life over it. I closed my eyes because I was so tired of hearing deliberate cruelty described as a mistake. A mistake was backing into a mailbox. A mistake was ordering the wrong product. This was not a mistake. This was targeted destruction after threats. Then my father said the one thing that erased the last bit of guilt I might have still been carrying. I offered to pay for it. What more did you want? I laughed because hearing it said that plainly made everything crystal clear. That's exactly the problem, I said. You still think money was the issue. I told him she didn't spill wine on a tablecloth. She broke into my business after threatening me and destroyed something she knew I loved because she wanted me hurt. And their first instinct was not to protect me. It was to make sure she didn't have to live with what she had done. My mother whispered, "She's family." I answered, "So am I." Neither of them had anything real to say after that. They repeated the same words in different forms. Cruel, heartless, unforgiving, humiliating. But by then I understood that this was never about right or wrong to them. It was about obedience. They could forgive threats, sabotage, and destruction as long as I kept playing the stable daughter, the reasonable one, the one who absorbed the damage and kept the family image intact. But the moment I forced the truth into the open, I became the problem. Over the next several days, I documented everything: every broken planter, every severed line, every destroyed bench, every specimen that wouldn't recover. I called insurance, contractors, and an attorney. The estimates were high enough that even my father stopped calling it a bad night. But by then, the money mattered less to me than the record. The truth existed outside the family now, and that mattered more than any check ever could. The pressure campaign kept coming. Relatives called to say my sister was suffering enough already. My mother texted that one day I would wish I had handled it with grace, and I remember staring at that message and thinking how cruel it was to use my own name as a lesson in silence. A week later, my father asked to meet. He sat across from me, slid an envelope toward my side of the table, and offered financial help, legal help, quiet help, if I would agree to stop this before it went any further. I didn't touch the envelope. I just asked him, "Why is her future always more important than my safety?" He had no answer. He only said, "She's your sister." I stood up and said, "Yes, she is. That's why this should have mattered to you sooner." I left the envelope on the table and walked out. The greenhouse is being rebuilt now. Some things are gone forever, and I still feel it every time I look at the empty spaces where my favorite plants used to be. But I also feel something stronger than grief. I feel free. I lost the version of my family that depended on my silence. I lost the illusion that love automatically means protection. And maybe I lost my sister long before the night she smashed my greenhouse. But I saved my business. I saved my boundaries. I saved myself from becoming one more person who called betrayal family and swallowed it in the name of peace. So no, I don't regret calling the police. I regret waiting so long to stop protecting the people who never protected me. And I want to ask you honestly, if the person who destroyed everything you built shared your blood, would you still call it forgiveness if they never had to pay the price? At Revenge Argonne, our team works hard to create meaningful and engaging stories that leave a lasting impression. We are committed to making it clear that these are fictional stories, created to share educational lessons, valuable insights, and positive messages with our viewers. Grace handled the situation with courage, self-respect, and a strong sense of justice, even when the people closest to her tried to silence the truth. She chose to protect her dream and her boundaries instead of allowing betrayal to go unchallenged. If you were in her position, would you have done the same, or would you have handled it differently?